One of the darker horror games out there is Cult: Divinity Lost, and its Game Master Guide Beyond Darkness and Madness is a strong source of guidelines for how to approach the kinds of dark narratives that cult stories often tell. While it is a supplement for Cult, I think that the information in it is valuable for all manners of horror role-playing, so I wanted to make this video to share some of those guidelines with you. I recommend picking up the book even if you don't plan on running Cult, it's useful as a general horror manual. Cult is described as an adult game, but this could be said about many other horror games as well, such as World of Darkness and Call of Cthulhu. What does the term adult mean in this context though? Beyond Darkness and Madness describes being adult as more than simply age and life experience. It also means that the group has the maturity and willingness to tell intriguing stories together. The GM should be mindful of their players' boundaries and not run the game like some sort of power trip or as a vehicle for self-fulfillment. The players should be accepting and trusting of each other, and they should go into the game knowing that it's all about creating an impactful story. It's not about winning or losing. Adults should be able to communicate with each other and discuss their feelings instead of complaining about things behind each other's backs. They give each other honest feedback and encouragement. While it's the group's shared responsibility to make sure that everyone is having fun, the GM needs to carry most of that responsibility. They are the game's adjudicator, the one who needs to be the most familiar with the rules and ensure that they are used in a consistent and unbiased manner. They're also responsible for making sure that the players remain involved and interested. The GM also has the role of creator, the one who introduces scenes and fills those scenes with NPCs, monsters and events in a way that structures a narrative. Here, the group can lessen the GM's burden by being more active in the roleplay by taking initiatives to help develop narrative elements and plotlines. However, it's up to the GM to establish an underlying narratives and maintain the logic of the story. This can be done easier by using an intrigue map. More of that in another video. Finally, the GM has the role of narrator, the one responsible for maintaining the conversation that carries the storytelling and progresses the scenes forward. They need to take the initiatives to steer the narrative while responding to the players in a way that's fair to the players and maintains the story's logic. They should also aim to create narratives that are compelling to the players and inviting to their characters. This is done in collaboration with the players though, and they have the responsibility to adhere to whatever themes and rules are dictated by the game, the story, the GM, and their fellow players. In this video I want to start out by talking briefly about some important aspects to keep in mind when you want to tell a horror story. I also want to discuss the horror contract as coined by the Cult: Divinity Lost rulebook. This directly relates to what I've said about being an adult in an adult game, what this means in practice, and what to consider when deciding to play a horror game like Cult. The most important aspects of a good horror game are atmosphere and pacing. If the horrors appear too frequently with monsters and mutilations around every corner, players will be desensitized and the story will lose its edge. You need to hold back at times and dispense the horror sparingly, giving players some time to recover, breathe and regain a sense of control and comfort. Then you can take that away from them. At the same time, you should hold on to moments of horror to stretch out intensity and prevent the PCs from escaping in a mere moment. Have the characters stumble as they run, drop something important, or feel something grab onto them. When they are injured, describe the sensation they experience, how the skin peels, the blood trickles, the bones break. Hold on to the tension to make the players truly feel the impact of what you're wanting to invoke. At times, less can be more. While holding on to moments and describing details can help you invoke discomfort and dread, the silent, the hidden, the unknown can do the same. By hinting at the horror, the player's imagination starts filling in the gaps. You can use allusions to slowly build up the tension, such as having the PCs hear the growl coming from the dark tunnel before they see the monster itself. Snippets of descriptions before the reveal. For monsters especially, have their presence be felt in the story before they are revealed. Show the traces the monsters leave behind to build anticipation among the players. When building tension, also consider the environments the scenes take place in and how those environments are described. An abandoned subway station in the middle of the night is always scarier than a packed cafe at lunchtime. The former presents the darkness of night, where you don't know what's hiding around the corners, and the sense of dread that comes from being alone in an unknown space. The latter presents the brightness of day with people all around you. The cafe is automatically less scary. But a skilled GM, or a skilled storyteller in general, can shift the tension and create a scarier atmosphere even in the bright and crowded cafe. By adding uncanny qualities to descriptions, the atmosphere immediately becomes more discomforting. People expect certain environments to behave in certain ways. If you make subtle changes, such as describing how the cafe is entirely silent, or how everyone there is dressed the same, it suddenly feels more unexpected and unnatural, and tension grows. This can be applied to increase the tension even further in an already tense atmosphere, such as describing a child playing alone in the dark and abandoned subway station. Leaning into the uncanny is a powerful tool. By making something feel even slightly off, even the mundane can become terrifying. The ghost moves in strange and jerky ways, the old lady pushes an empty stroller through the park while speaking baby talk at the child that isn't there. The refined guest at the fancy restaurant is taking off his gloves to eat a stew with his bare hands. Because these things are out of the ordinary, something feels off and the situation appears threatening. You can also work with atmosphere outside of the game itself by setting the mood in the room you're playing in, dampen the lights, light some candles, choose the right music to have in the background. Finally, characters can also be exposed to personal horror. Instead of making the threat external, like a monster or place, you can have it come from within. What fears do they have? What trauma do they carry? What is their inner world? Is there something that makes them feel shame, guilt, or helplessness? What kind of situation would be difficult, offensive, or transgressive for a character to face? Personal horror is often more impactful than external horror, often because it's more relatable. Sometimes the subject matter becomes too relatable and deeply personal in a way that can cause harm. If you're going to tackle sensitive subject matters, and especially subject matters that players may be able to relate to due to personal history or even trauma, then you need to discuss these subject matters in advance so that you know how to approach them in a way that's respectful towards the player. Horror as a genre is meant to invoke fright. It's meant to cause some anxiety and discomfort, and for that, all participants need to be on board with the premise. Some of the less empathetic and more emotionally mature people view horror games as a means of crossing personal boundaries because they know that it will be impactful. You wanted to be scared, so I scared you, they could say. They don't know the difference between controlled exposure and trauma. If you have a fear of spiders and want to overcome that fear, you need to expose yourself to that fear on your own terms. You need to be in control over how you approach your fear and know that you can step away from the experience if it becomes too much. You choose to approach the spider. You choose how long you will expose yourself to it. You are in control. If someone grabs that spider from the wall and throws it at you, you lose control, you panic, and your fear will intensify, it becomes traumatic. Horror is much the same way. Everyone goes into horror expecting discomfort, knowing that they choose to participate in that discomfort and have the option of backing out if it becomes too much. If you're the kind of GM who doesn't know the difference between controlled exposure and trauma, and you decide to throw extremely sensitive subject matters in the face of players who are deeply sensitive towards those subject matters, you're effectively throwing spiders at them. You're not helping them expose themselves to their fears. You're taking their sense of agency away from them, causing them to panic and risk intensifying those fears. Don't be that person. Be the kind of person who supports your players by giving them the experience they want to have. The only way to know the difference is by talking to them. And this is where the horror contract comes into play. I've talked about safety rules in previous videos, and there's a common misconception that the existence of safety rules such as lines and wheels somehow inhibit dark roleplay. In fact, the opposite is true. By invoking safety rules you can often go even darker, since you have the tools to do so safely and respectfully. If you let someone approach the spider on their own terms, you can often go much further than you otherwise be able to do. You can have a horror experience that is fun, where the discomfort is managed in a healthy way. Horror is meant to be fun, thrilling, and even cathartic for the players. But just like with controlled exposure, these moments of thrill and anxiety need to be framed by a protected and safe environment. The GM has the responsibility of scaring the players, giving them the thrill, while also providing a safe environment where they respect their boundaries. A mature group can often accomplish this through common sense practices, but a horror contract is a powerful tool that can aid even an experienced group in further developing their games. The horror contract is not an actual contract, but a sum of preparation, conversation, agreements and safety techniques that will be employed before, during and after the game session. Just because you play a horror game, you're not forced to explore themes that you would think is offensive, upsetting or traumatizing. An important part of outlining a horror contract is to define forbidden topics. Before starting the game, the GM should ask the players to write a list of things they don't want to experience in the story. Once all lists have been collected, announce to the group which topics are forbidden in the story, as well as which topics can be approached only with care. Most games refer to these as lines and wheels, but Cult uses the term forbidden and feared. Some common themes that are often brought up as forbidden topics are sexual assault, harm against children or animals, as well as suicide. These are also topics that many have some form of personal relation to, such as personal experience or the experiences of people close to them. Supernatural horror and monsters are rarely ever forbidden topics because they aren't as relatable in people's personal lives. They can be forbidden topics to some people though, and it's important that everyone knows and respects when a topic is forbidden. If the topic is central to the game itself and it's impossible to make it forbidden and still play that game, then the group should consider if that's really the game they should play. There's nothing wrong with picking a different game that everyone enjoys. Or if the player sits out this story and the group focuses on a story more in line with that player's wishes the next time. Good communication and mutual respect are key. If a forbidden topic comes into play, it's your job as GM to remind everyone that it is forbidden and suggest a different course of action. It's also a good idea to provide safety tools for the players to have them remind you and each other that forbidden topics have come into play and that the game is no longer fun and safe. I did a whole video on safety tools, so I'm not going to talk about them in detail here. Check out that video instead if you want to learn more. The GM must respect the lines and wheels as outlined by the horror contract when running the game, but it's also their prerogative to introduce additional concepts or themes as lines or wheels even if they are unestablished by the group. There are often topics that turn out to be lines or wheels but aren't considered during session 0, and players may retract previous statements about lines or wheels during play. By looking at the horror contract, the GM can draw guidance from it to make additions based on what they feel is appropriate, or they can make amendments to it based on player feedback. To gather this feedback, the GM should do regular check-ins before and after each session, as well as occasionally during the sessions themselves. Another good idea is for the GM to give certain content warnings prior to sessions where they know that certain subject matters will come into play. But the horror contract isn't only about forbidden topics, it's also about what the players want to see, what kind of experience they want to be frightened by and which topics they would like to approach and in what way. When having them write down the list of forbidden topics, you could also have them write down a list of things they find frightening but that they want to experience in game. Do they want cosmic horror, body horror, supernatural horror? What do they find impactful? By recognizing and drawing upon certain personal anxieties, the GM can build atmosphere and tension that help immersion. It's important to distinguish between things the players fear and things that are harmful, and it's only the person carrying the fear that can make that distinction. I mentioned the situation with the spider before and how important it is to expose yourself to your anxiety from a place of control and safety. Some people who are afraid of spiders will have no issues facing spiders in a role-playing game. Others wouldn't even want a reminder of spiders as they play. This doesn't mean that one person is right and the other is wrong. What it does mean is that one player feels like they approach their fear from a place of safety, while the other player doesn't have that same feeling of safety. If your fear is strong enough, a simple reminder is all it takes for you to no longer feel safe, even if you try to rationalize it. Because you don't feel safe, you lose your agency to whatever expectation you may have of your fear making itself known. If you cannot come into that sense of agency, you are unlikely to get a positive thrill. It's just harmful at this point. The horror contract is there to define what a player wants to give them this agency. This is also why it's important that GMs don't have the arrogance to think that crossing someone's boundaries will somehow help that player get over their fear. There's a reason for why exposure therapy is left to licensed therapists, and if you actually are a licensed therapist and you want to use role-playing as a tool for exposure, then you should already be employing safety rules anyway. If you don't, you cannot conduct therapy. Role-playing can be an extremely useful therapeutic tool, but it's important to remember that role-playing by itself isn't therapeutic by default. It's a silly game of immersive storytelling and play pretend, nothing more, nothing less. Now, if a player shares a real fear they have and tells you that they want to experience that fear in game, make sure to ask follow-up questions. Since it isn't a forbidden topic, it's fine to gather more information to make the player's experience more impactful. Ask them to elaborate why they chose the subject and what emotion is connected to it. Since I've talked a lot about spiders in this video, let's take arachnophobia as an example. This is something I have a pretty severe case of, since I grew up in a home that was infested with daddy longlegs. I have memories of them in my bed, in the shower, hiding in my clothes, crawling on my arms when I was at the computer, sitting on the toilet paper roll when I was in the bathroom. It was pretty bad. And I can get frustrated at people who claim that it's good to have spiders in your home because they keep the pests away. To me, spiders have always been the pests. So if I want to be a player in a horror game, and I give the GM consent to use spiders to scare me, I should give them more information so that they can be used effectively. I already know that photos and videos will be too much, those are forbidden topics, but I am fine with the GM describing them. I tell the GM that I wouldn't be scared by a tarantula or a spider web, since what causes anxiety are long and skinny legs. I also tell the GM that a way to effectively use spiders against me is to blend them into otherwise mundane scenes. When I lived in that spider home as a kid, I couldn't go into a room without scanning it for spiders first, and this is a habit that I cannot shake even today, depending on where I am. If the GM just sneaks spiders into the scenery here and there without putting too much emphasis on them, I would be constantly at edge. But also, if I hadn't given consent to it, I would probably get fed up with that GM pretty quickly. The horror contract would give me the agency to retract my consent at any time. If my skin starts crawling to a point where it distracts me too much and the game is no longer fun, I can make that known, and the GM as well as the other players would have to respect it. That mutual respect and understanding is vital for a working horror contract. A GM has a lot of responsibilities to make sure that the group has fun, but it's important to remember that the GM is part of that group as well. They are entitled to the same rights as anyone else at the table. If you are a GM and you put all of your focus on making a good game for your players that you forget about making the game good for yourself, you haven't put together a good game. Being a GM is often mentally and emotionally draining, and your role becomes even more exhausting if you have players who continue to push or even ignore the boundaries as defined by a horror contract. It's common for GMs to feel pressure to continue playing out of some notion of responsibility, even if you have toxic players who ignore the outlined rules, ignore your comfort level, and demand to explore forbidden topics while also ignoring any safety rules. If you feel that things are getting out of hand to a point where you're no longer having fun and where the players' behaviors make you uncomfortable, you should either pause the game to have a conversation or end the game outright. Some people simply cannot explore certain subject matters without making a joke of them or without trying to go for vulgarity and shock value. This doesn't mean that they are bad people. It's common to approach dark subject matters with humor or vulgarity to make them less relatable, less serious and less impactful. And openly admitting this would force you to be honest about something you find deeply personal. So instead of admitting that you're uncomfortable, you make jokes, hoping to either shift the emotional discomfort or hide your discomfort from the group. If you notice this as a GM and if you consider the behavior problematic, ask the player what they really feel about the game and whether they want to make additions or amendments to the horror contract. If you believe that the player wouldn't be honest about their true feelings, make the additions yourself to see if they change their behavior for the better. If it turns out that their behavior is actually destructive and ruins other people's fun, it's often best to bring it up and have that confrontation to perhaps reach a resolution instead of letting things boil inside. If you ignore destructive behavior out of fear of confrontations, the entire mood will sour and there's no chance that you'll be having a fun game. In summary, the horror contract is a useful tool to gather information that helps both the entire group set boundaries for their stories and provide insights into the themes and narratives they want to avoid or explore. It also gives an opportunity to request certain concepts and ideas, incorporate player wants and character relations, as well as other important key elements. It's a framework for exploring dark subject matters in a way that feels responsible, respectful and safe, which can often lead to even darker storytelling. If you like this video and want to see something similar, I recommend my video The Attraction to Evil, in which I talk more about what it is about horror that attracts people, with a focus on Vampire the Masquerade. I have ideas for more videos related to role-playing horror games, and make sure to like, share, comment and subscribe if you're interested in that kind of content. Until next time.